Welcome, my name is Craig Muir and I'm a consultant at Caisorp Consulting. What I want to show you today is a demonstration of the Caisorp Claims Management System, known as the CMS. The CMS is used by organisations to manage and control the approval process of all monetary claims between themselves and their customers. Examples of these claims include credit notes, rebate payments, refunds, and another example is promotions. Typically, companies use a series of off-system processes to control these payments. Claims management is often a paper-based system that involves someone taking details from a customer and filling out a form. The form is then forwarded to the appropriate person for signing and eventually finds its way to the accounts department, where it's entered as a transaction in the company's ERP system. Now, this system is not ideal. Firstly, it lacks visibility. No one knows how many claims are out there in the approval world. More importantly, no one knows what these claims are worth. As they are pieces of paper, claims can also go missing. The amount of effort that is involved in filling out the form, finding the right person to approve the claim, investigating the claim, and finally, once approved, then taking that information and retyping it into the ERP can be quite large. The whole process takes a lot of time and, more importantly, is prone to input errors. Not only that, but the amount of time it takes for the claim to be pushed through the entire process can also be exceedingly high. Another key point is that paper-based systems do not easily lend themselves to data analysis. It's very hard for us to do any form of root cause analysis to uncover any hidden issues the organisation is suffering. As I'm about to show you, the Caisorp CMS is an electronic claims management system. It is built so that it can be tailored to your organisation's process rather than you having to adapt to its processes. Every implementation of the CMS that we do is very different. The reason for that is that every organisation we go to is very unique. Now, some of the key points and benefits that the CMS gives us, well, firstly, it gives us 100% visibility to the claims process. Second, it can speed up your processes and reduce the input overhead and error rates that you're getting. Finally, when integrated with an ERP system, it can really start to streamline your processes. So what I'm going to do now is stop talking about it and give you a bit of a demonstration. Okay, so here's an example of a claims management system we've developed for one of our customers. Now, this particular system is based on Lotus Notes, as the client actually uses Lotus Notes. But we could just as easily provide an intranet-based solution that could be used from a standard web browser. And what we're doing at the moment is we're currently developing a cloud-based solution. So if you want us to host the solution, we can even do that for you. Now, with our intranet and cloud-based systems, what we've been able to do is we can even add on a customer portal. And what this will allow you to do is it'll actually allow your customers to be able to come in online and monitor the claim progress and even create claims for themselves. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a claim. So I'll click on the Create Claim button, and up will come my claim form. Okay, now you can see here the first question it actually asked me is around which particular claim type I'm doing. Now, this has basically been defined by the customer's requirements. So the customer's actually asked us to define these particular claim types. Now, if you notice, if I go and change to one of these, say I select refund, some of the fields in the form actually change for me. So I get different fields that I can actually enter on. So you can see here for this particular type, we've got a refund type where I can select either check or credit card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select credit card just to show you. You can see here it's actually going to ask for the credit card details. Okay, but for the purpose of this demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to reselect credit note, as this is the simplest transaction for demonstration purposes. Okay, so now the form is reset and I get to enter in the rest of the data. The next question it's going to ask me is around reason code. So if I click on my Find button here, we can see that we can select from a series of reasons for why we're actually creating this credit note. For the purpose of the demonstration, I'm going to select price adjustment. Okay, the next question it asks is around contact method. Now, that might seem a rather strange question to ask, but for this particular client, their ERP system actually requires a contact method to be lodged when the actual transaction gets created at the end of the process. So we do need to ask this question at the front. So what I'm just going to do is go ahead and select phone. Okay, so now we get down to some of the more interesting questions. The next question is the approval location. Now the approver location is pretty important. Now this particular client requested that the claim workflow be based on a business unit location. So if I click on find, you can see here that all the business unit locations are listed, and these will pretty much define the workflow of the claim as it goes along its process. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and select one of these. You can see here if I click on Perth Commercial Sales, we'll get a series of people who could be involved, who may be involved in the process. Now what I'm going to do for this one is I'm actually going to select my sample location and select Robert Glass as the first person. So I'm going to click OK there. Okay, so the next question it asks me is invoice number. So what invoice number is this claim against? So I go ahead and enter my invoice number. Now, if I was on the customer site using their system, what I'd be able to do here is click on this Retrieve Invoice Details button. What they would do for me is it would go to their ERP system, draw all of their invoice information, and bring back the key information that I require. And that sort of information would be the customer number, the customer name, their address, and more importantly, it would also bring across invoice details into my details section. But for the purposes of this demonstration, what we've done is we've actually modified the system to allow me to enter that manually. So what I'll do is I'll go and select the customer. From the drop down, I'll select A, and we'll choose Anderson Pet Supplies. Okay, so that's now brought across the customer name and address details, and all I have to do is fill in the details of the claim. So for this particular one, we'll enter some information. Okay. The next question asks me the credit note comments. Now these will actually, for this customer, actually show up on the credit note as it's created. So we want to put in a shortened version here. So we'll say something like overcharged 5 widgets. Then all we have to do is enter an amount. So we'll enter in $150. Okay, so that's all the information we really needed. So what I can do now is go and click on Save and Close, and that credit note has now been created for me. So if I go and have a look at my claims by outstanding by location, we can see that our sample location now has one for Anderson's Pet Supplies. If I double click on this, we can see all the information, and down below we can actually see in our dispute log, very importantly, it logs every event that happens. It says that I have gone and created this claim. Okay, what I'd like to do now is take you through a bit of the configuration of the system to give you a bit of an understanding of what's in the background of the system that drives it. If you have a look down at the bottom left here, you'll see this administration section. Now this administration section could look quite different depending on the implementation of the system. So these particular options are applicable for the implementation we did for this client, but might be quite different for another implementation. Okay, so if we have a look at a couple of these, we'll have a look at the claims locations. Now the claims locations section basically just gives us a list of business unit locations, and one of those was chosen in the example we did earlier, and that will define its approval path, as I'll show you in a second. Okay, the next one I want to show you is the claim approvers. Now this is quite an important one for this implementation. What this basically does is it shows you all of the different approvers that will be part of an approval process depending on the business unit location that was chosen for the request. So let's have a look at an example here. Brisbane Dealer Sales is a good one. Okay, we can see here we've got a couple of people at level 1. So we've got Richard Scott and Alan DeSouza. Now these two guys will most likely receive the request when it's created. So one of these two will be chosen to first authorize the request. Now depending on their approval limit, as in how much they can approve, the request can either be approved by them and no one else has to look at it, or if they don't have enough approval limit, then what will happen is it will then go to someone at level 2 to have a look at and approve. And again, say Richard approves it, he doesn't have the approval limit, it might then end up on Romano's desk. What he will then do is when he goes to approve it, if he's got the approval limit, again, it will be approved. Otherwise, it'll then move its way up to level 3. And it does that until it gets to the highest level. In this particular case, it's just level 4. Okay, what I'd like to do is introduce you to a concept of automatic escalation and delegation. Now, what this is this was implemented for this particular client. What the system does is automatically will delegate the request to other people if the request is not touched for a certain number of days. So an example of that would be, say if Richard Scott had a request and for X number of days he didn't touch it. The system would then go and say, okay, he hasn't touched this for a while. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and delegate to everyone at his level. So Alan DeSouza would be notified. Now again, if Alan decided to request and do nothing with it, then what would happen is automatic escalation would happen and it would be moved to the first person at level 2. So Romano here would then get the request. And this process of automatic escalation and delegation continues until it eventually would find its way, after a period of time, up to the CEO's desk. And that process of escalation and delegation is one of the ways in which that we can get people to authorize the request, because obviously they don't want something ending up on the CEO's desk. Okay, now there's a couple of other databases I'd like to show you. Excuse me. So we have the Caisorp Delegation of Authority database. Now I was talking about approval limits a couple of minutes ago. This is basically where those approval limits are defined. Now I just want to draw your attention to something. If you see me, I've got a delegation of authority limit, or a monetary approval limit, of $10,000. Whereas Rob, he only has a monetary approval limit of $1,000. Okay. Now, one other database I'd like to really just quickly touch on, excuse me, is the Caisorp ERP interface. Now what the Caisorp ERP interface is it's basically a mechanism for drawing data and synchronizing data with your ERP. So there's all sorts of tables that might be synchronized, and this process normally happens overnight. So things like customers, when a new customer is added, the claims management system needs to know about this customer, so that's synchronized within this list here. And we have all sorts of different records that can be added, and these can be quite unique to any implementation. So this particular client required CMS reason codes, they had some return reason codes, a whole lot of different records that get synchronized with the ERP. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is take you through the approval path for the request we created earlier. If you remember, we created a request from sample location, and it was currently sitting with Robert Glass to approve. Now what actually happened when that request was created, that an email was sent out to Robert Glass's inbox, where if he was sitting at his desk, he could simply open that up. There's a link there, he could click on that, and he could go in and view the request. Another way is he could have come into Outstanding Requests by Approver and had a look at all of his requests and gone into it from there. So he can double click it on there. He then has some options to be able to approve it if he wants, decline it, or handball it. Now let's just say for example that Rob was actually a sales guy, and say we don't even see him for maybe only 3 hours a week. What this customer actually got us to develop for them was a mobile interface that actually allowed their mobile sales force to be able to go in and approve a request without actually having to be on site. So what I'd like to do is just really quickly show you that interface. Okay, let me just start the software. It does take a couple of seconds, so bear with me. Almost there. Okay, so now we can see Rob's mobile phone. So what Rob can now do is click on the icon, put in his credentials, type in his password, and log in. Now Rob has a couple of different options here from this mobile phone. The first one, which we'll use in a minute, is claims to approve, which will show him all of his claims that he needs to approve. He can also look at all current claims by customer, and he can also find a claim by a reference number. So it gives him the ability to search for any information he needs. So what we're going to do is we're going to click in Claims to Approve, and here is a list of all the different claims that Rob has to approve. If you have a look at here, the second bottom one is the Anderson's Pet Supplies one, the one that we're dealing with. So Rob can now go in here. He gets all the main information, all the details, as well as the log, and he gets all the information he needs to make a decision. So what he now can do is he again has a couple of different options. He can approve it if he's happy with it, decline it if he's not, or handball it if he believes it should be someone else who's approving this. But he's quite happy with this claim, so what he's going to do is he's going to approve it. So we'll click on Approve, and the claim has been approved. Now, what I'll do is I'll just jump back to the application and show you what happened there. So this request here has now disappeared from under Robert Glass, and it's actually now sitting under awaiting finance sign-off. But I'm not going to show you that just yet. What I'd like to do is just jump back to the mobile interface and look at another request. So if we have a look at the stonemasons tooling claim, we can see this is actually for an amount that is beyond the $1,000 that Rob actually has to approve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get Rob to approve this. Okay, now something slightly different happened in this particular case. What's actually happened is that the claim has been approved, but as Rob didn't have the required approval level, it's actually been sent to me as the first approver at the next level to approve. So let's just jump into the database and just see how that looks. So if I refresh, you'll see that it's gone from under Rob, but this particular one is sitting under me. So I now have a couple of different options I can do. So I can now have a look at this. You can see the growing log as all the different actions are performed. Actually, here's an interesting thing I should show you while I'm here. One thing I didn't show you when creating the previous request is that you can actually store attachments or any form of documentation against the request. In this particular case, they've stored a PDF of the invoice, and they've stored some form of form that was obviously signed. Okay, so I've got a couple of different options, but what I've decided to do is I'm going to edit this request. And I'm going to put in some comments indicating I need some more information. Add those comments, and I'm going to handball that to Craig. To Rob. So click OK there. Okay, so I'll now save and close that, and we can see it's gone from my list and it's now sitting back on Rob's. Okay, so now what I want to do is just take you really quickly through the rest of the approval cycle that the first request went through. So if you remember, Rob approved that. He had the approval limit to be able to do it. So that's now sitting in awaiting finance sign-off. So if I click in here by date, you can see that the first one there, and some pet supplies, is sitting there. So now somebody from finance has obviously got a notification about this. They can then go into the request, perform any reviews they need to in order to ensure that it's applicable. They can then edit it, and then they can sign it off. Okay, so that's then signed off. Now the final step in the whole process is actually an automated one. What's actually happened is that this request has been now put in a queue to be automatically allocated, or for transactions to be automatically created in the client's MoveX ERP system. So if we click on, you can see the request is sitting here, and that is basically sitting in a queue, and at some point a process will go and pick that up and automatically create all the required transactions inside of MoveX for them without them having to do anything. Okay, so before I finish, the last thing I wanted to show you in the system is a little bit on the reporting side. Now the system does have some fairly sophisticated reporting in it. I'd just like to show you a couple of the reports that are in here. Now, if you have a look under the claim section, which we have been working in, really this claim section is all about visibility. That is, whereabouts a request is within the process. So if we have a look at under approver, you can see here all of the claims that Rob has open and needs to approve. Again, you could go by location to see, okay, under sample locations, all of these require approving. And then we have different views for the different steps in each process. Now this might be very different in different implementations of the CMS. It really depends on the process in which the company requires as to what views will actually show up here. Okay, now I'd like to skip down to the reports section. In the reports section there's a couple of good ones here. Under process finished, this is really about root cause analysis. So these views here really allow you to drill in and see exactly what's happening with your completed requests. So a couple of good ones might be claims by location, for instance. What we can see here is if we go into Melbourne dealer sales, we can see that really they are the ones that are generating most of these. Coming second there is the Melbourne service. So if we drill on Melbourne dealer sales, what we can see is, okay, so what's actually causing this? We can see that really one of the biggest culprits there is rebates, but probably the one you probably really want to drill in and is this price adjustment. So from there we can drill in and we can see by year and then by month exactly how we're trending here. So it gives a good idea, a good place to start for somebody who's trying to investigate why this is actually happening. Another good one to show you would be claims by reason. So let me just click on this. Again, it's a great root cause analysis report. So let's just look at some of the bigger ones. So if we can see here, rebates, probably not a good one. Let's continue to pick on price adjustments. We can see there 429 of those. So again, we can drill in, see who's the culprit. Again, Melbourne dealer sales, and again we can go by year and month. Okay. Now the last thing I'd just really like to show you very quickly is the problem tickets reporting area. Now this is actually quite good for allowing you to see how the process itself is being managed. So let me just click on resolved by days. What we can see here for 2012, if I say expand January, what we can see is that what this report's telling us is that 78 were raised in January. And of those 78, 74 were completed within that January period, allowing only 4 to spill over into the next month, which is pretty good by any standards. If we keep expanding, we can see a couple of the others, see if there's something more interesting. Okay, here we have one under June, where we can see under June they raised 105, 104 were completed within that period, but 1 wasn't. And we can see that that was actually from about 3 months earlier, or between 3 and 6 months earlier. Now the reason, I won't bore you with going in and showing you, but the reason why this claim took so long is it's actually put on hold and then resubmitted later. Well, that really concludes the software demonstration part of the presentation, so I hope that gives you a good idea of what the system can do and how the system works. Okay, now what I'd like to do is take you through a case study of an actual live example where we were contracted to use technology to improve the claims management process for a particular company. Unfortunately, due to confidentiality, I can't mention the name of the company, but I can say that they are a global leader in white goods. The company had just gone through a pretty large acquisition stage and were combining and standardizing 4 businesses, each with their own aftermarket business, and all of which were household names in Australia. Now this was a pretty significant challenge due to the diversity of the product offerings that each of the divisions actually had. Now the organisation's claims management process was pretty much almost the perfect stereotype of a manual paper-based system. Customers would call up the call centre to log a dispute. A claim would then be created by the details being jotted down on pink pieces of paper. Now these pink pieces of paper would be then handed to the aftermarket coordinator, who would then send these pieces of paper out on their sometimes epic journey of approval discovery. Now like many explorers, some were never heard of or seen again. We actually counted on the senior manager's desk over 500 pieces of pink paper, each waiting for approval and then to be handed on to finance. Many of these were actually over 6 months old, so in summary, they were in a mess. Now one of the main issues they faced was a lack of visibility to the current unapproved claims. No one really knew how many claims were out there in Paperland, how long they'd been there, and really most importantly, what was the value of these claims. The business knew that on an annualised basis that these claims were costing them, but they had no real visibility as to the future costs to be incurred. They were always reacting to the situation. So in essence, the business knew that it was bleeding money, but really had no mechanism to finding out how or why. Now, as the system was a paper-based system, all information had to be completed manually on a piece of paper. Invoices and job sheets then had to be located, they then need to be printed and attached to the claim. Once approved, the data then had to be re-entered into BPIX, which was their ERP system, in order to process the credit. Now, not only is this inefficient, but manual entry of data combined with no controls around the amount of data collected from the call centre meant that many claims were being incorrectly processed. Many claims were actually being approved without any real investigation, as the information required was simply not available. Now, the turnaround times for claims were measured in months. The reason for this is there was no real enforceable process to ensure that claims were dealt with in any kind of timely fashion. And there was also a real lack of data to help them pinpoint the root cause of why they were getting the claims in the first place. Like many organisations, they required better quality machinable data that would enable them to make more informed decisions. So it's clear they needed a solution, so they contacted us to see what assistance we could offer them. What I'd like to do now is to talk very quickly about the process we went through to determine the best way in which they could use technology to help them through this. Now, the first step that we took was to take their current process and then, through a series of workshops with the main stakeholders in the process, look to refine the process to see how they would like it to work in the utopian world. Now, when doing this, it's very important to free yourself of many of the traps that limit good process re-engineering. Firstly, forget what you did in the past. Most processes are built up over time, and quite often steps that are performed made sense at that particular point in time, but are simply not required today. But yet they are still ritualistically performed, as no one really has gone through the process of questioning that. Also, forget about technology limitations. When you start a process and you clean sheet a new process, try not to consider the technology and any limitations it might have. There may be some limitations that actually cause you to change the process down the track, but that is much further down the track. And in our experience, if you pick the right technology, there's almost always a way. And the third point is that process re-engineering and process improvement are not a set and forget activity. Business today is fluid, and change, as you know, is everywhere. Make sure that you build in a process review to ensure that processes are always operating at their most efficient. Now, once you've mapped out the process, we then had to set about designing a system that would meet all of their challenges. Now, I want to mention some of the special requirements that came out of the process mapping that we did. Now, the first was a requirement for a system-based workflow application that would, in essence, take control of the process and ensure that all the required data was available to them. There was also a requirement to ensure that the approver had the appropriate approval limit based on the organisation's delegation of authority limits. Where the person's approved a claim but does not have the required limit, then the claim would have to be automatically escalated to someone at the next approval level. One of the biggest challenges that existed was to try and find a way to ensure that approvals were actually done in a reasonable time, rather than just sitting on someone's desk until a customer screamed loud enough for something to be done. Now, our solution to this was to implement what we called an automated escalation and delegation process. Now, what this involved was the system automatically notifying or delegating to other potential approvers if a claim had been untouched for a certain number of days. If the claim was still remained untouched for another X number of days, then the request would be escalated to the person's manager to deal with. The process of escalation and delegation would then continue until it would eventually reach the CEO's desk, and as you can guess, people would ensure that that never happened. Okay, now where an action was required from someone, then there was a requirement for the actioner to be notified. Now they would either be notified by email or for, say, sales guys on the road, a much preferred method was that they be notified by SMS. Now, a major audit requirement was to ensure that all events, including entry, modification, and approvals, would all be logged against the claim. Now, in order to eliminate double entry of claims and reduce the associated errors, the organisation really required some serious ERP integration. What they required was that on entry of a claim, all go through its approval cycle, and once the final approval had been done, then the system was to automatically go and create any relevant transactions inside of their ERP for them automatically without any form of user interaction at all. And finally, what they required was some sort of reporting. They needed to really understand what was happening. They needed to get to the root cause and identify costs. What they actually required was many reports to be created so that data could be reviewed and analysed in a variety of different ways. So the solution we recommended had its foundations based on the Caisorp CMS. Now, the Caisorp CMS provided a solid base that we could build the required workflow and approval functionality into. Now, it already had a lot of what they required. It already had full logging, it already had notifications, and it already had approval limits within it. But as with every organisation that we go to, they did things slightly differently. So the system needed to be modified to suit the exact requirements of the process. One of the key changes that we had to do was to change the delegation and escalation functionality, as well as map the process that we defined into the workflow of the actual application itself. Okay, so how do we actually improve the process? Firstly, no more pink pieces of paper on people's desks, which they were pretty happy about. Now, the average amount of time that went into creating the request, investigating, approving, and then creating the request in the ERP actually went from 66 minutes in their current system down to 40 minutes. Now, that's a saving of almost 40%. Now, the time taken from creation of the request through to the end of the process also dropped from 40 days down to 10 days. Now, the reason this happened is many of the roadblocks have been removed, and one of the main ones was the fear of escalation, and that became a good motivator to ensure that processing was done in a reasonable time frame. Now, one of the other things they noted was a significant drop in the error rates and turnbacks. Now, we can't really report as to what that drop was because their initial system really didn't have any mechanism for us to actually record that. And even more importantly, they have reported back to us that they had I guess a drop in the total number of claims. Now, the reason for this is that they now had data available to see why they were getting various claims. They were able to work on some of, I guess, the root causes of the claims to get to why they're actually happening and to solve those issues. Now, this is obviously an ongoing process, but they are really starting to see some good results around there. And finally, they now had full visibility and control of their process. Okay, well, that's really all I wanted to discuss today, so thanks for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you'd like some more information or would like to arrange a demonstration of the CMS, then head to our website at www.caisorp.com.au. We look forward to hearing from you.